Karen stepped onto the sprawling lawn, her eyes sweeping over the rows of elegantly adorned tables and the towering white arch at the far end. This was supposed to be her special day, her moment to shine. But as she glanced around, a knot of unease formed in the pit of her stomach. "I don't understand," she murmured, turning to the wedding planner at her side. "Didn't I make it perfectly clear that I wanted this event on my property? Why are there cows?" The planner shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you see, Mrs. Wilkins, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. This land actually belongs to your neighbor, Mr. Erickson. He didn't give us permission to use it." Karen's eyes narrowed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. "That can't be right. I specifically told you this was my land. How dare he interfere with my wedding?" Without another word, she stormed across the lawn, her designer heels sinking into the soft earth. The cows regarded her with mild curiosity as she approached the fence, her face flushed with rage. "Mr. Erickson," she shouted, her voice carrying across the field. "Get up here right now and explain yourself." A weathered figure emerged from the nearby farmhouse, wiping his calloused hands on a rag. He ambled over to the fence, his expression impassive. "Mornin', Karen," he said, his deep voice betraying a hint of amusement. "Looks like you're having a bit of a problem here." "A problem?" Karen spat, her hands trembling. "You're damn right, there's a problem. This is my land, and I'm holding my wedding here, whether you like it or not." Mr. Erickson shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, ma'am. This here is my property, and I never gave you permission to use it. Those are my bulls you've got running around over there." Karen's jaw tightened, and she glared at him with undisguised fury. "Your bulls? Well then, I suggest you get them out of here before I call the authorities. This is my special day, and I won't let you ruin it." Mr. Erickson regarded her for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, leaving Karen fuming on the other side of the fence. As the wedding planner hurried over to her, Karen felt a surge of panic. This couldn't be happening. She had spent months planning every detail of this event, and she wasn't about to let some stubborn old farmer ruin it. "We have to do something," she hissed, her eyes darting around the scene. "I can't have my wedding ruined by a bunch of cows." The planner hesitated, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'm not sure what we can do, Mrs. Wilkins. This is private property, and we don't have the right to be here." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her mind racing. She couldn't let this stand. This was her day, and she was going to have it, no matter what it took. Karen paced back and forth, her mind whirring with possibilities. She couldn't let this happen. Her perfect wedding day was slipping through her fingers, all because of that stubborn old farmer and his infuriating livestock. Suddenly, an idea struck her. "The wedding party," she murmured, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "If we can't have the ceremony here, then we'll just have to move it." The wedding planner blinked in surprise. "Move it? But where would we go? We've already paid the deposits, and—" Karen raised a hand, silencing him. "That's not your concern. I'll handle the logistics. Right now, I need you to gather everyone and get them ready to relocate. We're going to have the wedding on my terms, whether Mr. Erickson likes it or not." The planner hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but one look at Karen's determined expression told him it was useless to argue. With a resigned sigh, he hurried off to round up the wedding party. As the guests began to file into their vehicles, Karen approached the fence again, her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Erickson," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I do hope you'll be joining us for the ceremony." The farmer emerged from the farmhouse, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Ceremony? What are you talking about, Karen?" "Why, the wedding, of course," Karen replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Since you've so graciously allowed us to use your land, the least you can do is come and witness the happy occasion." Mr. Erickson's eyes widened with realization, and he shook his head firmly. Now hold on a minute, Karen. I ain't giving you permission to do anything on my property. You need to pack up and leave right now. Karen's smile never wavered. Oh, I'm afraid that's not an option, Mr. Erickson. You see, we've already made all the arrangements. The wedding is going to proceed as planned, right here on your land. The farmer's expression darkened, and he took a step toward the fence. I'm warning you, Karen. You better get your people off my property before. Before what? Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. Before you send your cows after us? I think we both know you won't do that, Mr. Erickson. You're just a harmless old farmer after all. Mr. Erickson's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Karen thought she saw a flicker of genuine anger in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a look of resigned exasperation. Have it your way then, he muttered, turning and heading back toward the farmhouse. But don't say I didn't warn you. As the wedding party began to file onto the property, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had won, and Mr. Erickson knew it. This was going to be the wedding of the century, and nothing, not even a few stubborn cows, was going to ruin it. The sound of music and laughter filled the air as the wedding guests gathered on Mr. Erickson's land. Karen stood at the center of it all, her face beaming with satisfaction. She had won, and she was determined to savor every moment. As the ceremony began, Karen couldn't help but glance over at the farmhouse, half expecting Mr. Erickson to come charging out and put a stop to it all. But the old farmer remained out of sight, his presence a looming, silent shadow over the festivities. The wedding progressed without incident, and Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of smugness as she exchanged vows with her new husband. She had proven that she was the one in control, that no one, not even a stubborn old farmer, could stand in her way. As the reception kicked into full swing, Karen couldn't resist the urge to gloat. She sought out the wedding planner, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Well, it looks like we pulled it off after all, doesn't it? She said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I told you we could make this work, despite Mr. Erickson's little tantrum. The planner shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the scene. I suppose so, Mrs. Wilkins, but I still can't help but feel like we're overstepping our bounds here. This is Mr. Erickson's property, and it's my wedding. Karen interrupted, her voice rising with indignation. This is my special day, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it perfect. Mr. Erickson will just have to deal with it. The planner opened his mouth to protest, but the look on Karen's face told him it was useless. Sighing, he turned and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Karen to bask in her triumph. As the night wore on, the wedding guests continued to revel in the festivities, blissfully unaware of the tension that hung in the air. Karen moved from one group to the next, her smile never wavering as she basked in the attention and admiration of her friends and family. But even as she danced and mingled, a nagging sense of unease began to creep into the back of her mind. What if Mr. Erickson decided to put a stop to all of this? What if he called the authorities or, worse, unleashed his cows on the unsuspecting guests? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, and she found herself glancing nervously toward the farmhouse, half expecting to see the old farmer charging toward them, his face twisted with rage. But the farmhouse remained dark and silent, and the guests continued to celebrate, oblivious to the tension that was slowly building beneath the surface. As the night drew to a close, Karen finally allowed herself to relax, convinced that she had won. But even as she basked in the afterglow of her triumph, a nagging sense of unease lingered, whispering that the worst was yet to come. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Karen woke with a sense of triumph. She had won, and she knew it. Mr. Erickson had been powerless to stop her from holding her wedding on his land, and she couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized he had been defeated. As she sipped her coffee and surveyed the still pristine lawn, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of annoyance. Why hadn't the old farmer put up more of a fight? Surely he must have been fuming at the thought of his property being used without his permission. Just as she was about to dismiss the matter entirely, a commotion from the direction of the farmhouse caught her attention. She squinted her eyes, trying to make out the source of the commotion, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. Mr. Erikson was standing at the edge of the field, his face twisted with rage as he gestured wildly toward the wedding tent. And behind him, a herd of massive bulls were slowly making their way across the field, their hooves thundering against the ground. Karen's heart raced as she realized what was happening. "No," she whispered, her fingers gripping the coffee mug so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "He can't be serious." But as the bulls drew closer, it became painfully clear that Mr. Erikson was, in fact, deadly serious. Karen watched in horror as the massive animals surged forward, their eyes wild and their horns gleaming in the morning light. Without a moment's hesitation, she sprang into action, her mind racing as she tried to figure out what to do. She couldn't let her guests be trampled by those beasts, but she also couldn't bring herself to admit defeat. As the bulls drew closer, Karen made a split-second decision. She raced toward the wedding tent, her heels sinking into the soft earth as she tried to warn the oblivious guests. "Get out of here," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "There's a herd of bulls coming." The guests looked up in confusion, their faces painted with a mix of surprise and fear. Some began to move, but others remained rooted to the spot, their eyes wide with terror. Karen watched in horror as the bulls surged forward, their massive bodies barreling toward the wedding tent. She knew she had to do something, but the panic was overwhelming, and her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. In the end, she could only watch in helpless desperation as the bulls swept through the wedding tent, sending tables and chairs flying in all directions. Guests screamed and scrambled, but it was too late. The damage had been done. As the dust settled, Karen surveyed the scene, her heart sinking with the realization that her perfect day had been utterly ruined. She had lost, and Mr. Erikson had won. In the aftermath of the chaos, a thick silence hung in the air. Karen stood amidst the wreckage, her eyes wide with disbelief and her hands shaking with a mix of fear and fury. The wedding guests, their faces pale and their clothes disheveled, stared at the scene in stunned silence. Some had managed to escape unharmed, but others nursed cuts and bruises, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. As the dust settled, Karen's gaze locked onto Mr. Erikson, who stood at the edge of the field, his arms crossed over his chest. His weathered face was etched with a grim satisfaction, and Karen felt a surge of rage rise within her. "You did this," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "How dare you ruin my wedding day?" Mr. Erikson shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Karen's. "I'd warned you, Karen," he said, his voice low and even. "I told you to get off my property, but you just wouldn't listen." Karen's hands balled into fists, her nails digging into the soft flesh of her palms. "This is your fault," she spat, her eyes narrowing with hatred. "You sent those animals to destroy everything." The old farmer's expression hardened, and for a moment, Karen thought she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. "I didn't send them to destroy anything, Karen," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I just let them out to graze, same as I do every day. You're the one who chose to have your wedding here, despite my objections." Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the words died on her lips as she realized the truth of his words. She had been the one to defy him, to force her way onto his property. And now, the consequences of her actions were plain for all to see. Slowly, the fight seemed to drain from her, and she sagged against the remains of the wedding tent, her shoulders hunched with defeat. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," she whispered, her voice tinged with a mixture of sorrow and shame. "And now it's ruined. All because of you and your stupid cows." Mr. Erikson watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. Then, with a heavy sigh, He turned and began to make his way back toward the farmhouse, leaving Karen and her guests to pick up the pieces. In the aftermath of the chaos, Karen felt a sense of overwhelming despair. Her perfect wedding day had been reduced to a pile of rubble, and she knew that there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. As the guests slowly began to gather their belongings and make their way home, Karen couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. All of her careful planning, all of her dreams and aspirations had been reduced to a cruel joke, a testament to her own hubris and Mr. Erickson's quiet determination. In the end, she couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to salvage the situation. But as she looked out over the devastation, she knew that the damage was irreparable. Her wedding day had been a complete and utter failure, and there was no one to blame but herself. In the days that followed, Karen found herself consumed by a seething rage that seemed to consume her every waking moment. She replayed the events of her ruined wedding day over and over in her mind, her anger and humiliation only growing with each recollection. How dare that stubborn old farmer ruin her special day? She had invested so much time, money, and effort into planning the perfect wedding, and it had all been for naught. And the worst part was that she knew deep down that she had only herself to blame. As the reality of the situation sank in, Karen found herself unable to let it go. She obsessed over every detail, agonizing over what she could have done differently, what she could have said to convince Mr. Erickson to let her have her way. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of powerlessness that had consumed her in that moment. She had been so certain of her victory, so sure that she could bulldoze her way through any obstacle, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered dreams. The weight of her humiliation was crushing, and she found herself lashing out at those around her, snapping and snarling at her friends and family who had been nothing but supportive in the aftermath of the disaster. "This is all your fault," she would scream, her face contorted with rage. "If you had just listened to me, if you had just done what I told you, none of this would have happened." But her outbursts only served to further isolate her, as her loved ones struggled to understand the depth of her pain and the intensity of her anger. As the days turned into weeks, Karen found herself sinking deeper and deeper into a pit of despair. She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat, and she couldn't focus on anything other than her burning desire for revenge. And then, one night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, a plan began to take shape in her mind. It was risky, it was dangerous, and it was almost certainly illegal. But at that moment, Karen didn't care. All she knew was that she had to find a way to make Mr. Erickson pay for what he had done to her. With a newfound sense of purpose, she began to plot, her mind racing as she considered every possible scenario, every possible outcome. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, but the thirst for vengeance had consumed her, and she was willing to risk everything to get the justice she felt she deserved. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's obsession only grew, and she found herself drawn deeper and deeper into a web of deceit and manipulation. She was no longer the same person she had been before, and she knew that there was no turning back. Over the next few weeks, Karen's obsession with getting revenge on Mr. Erickson only continued to grow. She spent countless hours poring over maps of his property, studying the layout of his land and the location of his farmhouse. She even went so far as to hire a private investigator to dig up any dirt she could find on the old farmer, desperate to find some sort of leverage that she could use against him. But as the days turned into weeks, Karen's plans only became more and more convoluted and risky. She toyed with the idea of filing a lawsuit, but quickly dismissed it, knowing that the odds of winning were slim at best. She considered vandalism or sabotage, but the fear of getting caught kept her from taking any concrete action. Finally, in a moment of desperate desperation, Karen hit upon what she thought was the perfect plan. She would unleash Mr. Erickson's own bulls on his property, causing chaos and destruction that would surely get the authorities involved. And with any luck, the investigation would uncover some sort of wrongdoing on the farmer's part, giving Karen the leverage she needed to finally get her revenge. It was a bold and reckless plan, to be sure, but in Karen's mind, it was the only way to truly make Mr. Erikson pay for what he had done. She spent weeks planning and preparing, meticulously mapping out every step of the operation and making sure that she had contingencies in place in case anything went wrong. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. Karen waited until the dead of night, when she knew that Mr. Erikson would be sound asleep in his farmhouse. Then, with a sense of grim determination, she made her way to the edge of his property, armed with a set of bolt cutters and a plan that she was certain would work. As she approached the fence, Karen's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, and she knew that there was no turning back. With a few quick snips of the bolt cutters, she had created an opening in the fence, and she could hear the familiar bellowing of the bulls in the distance. Steeling her nerves, Karen made her way into the field, her eyes adjusting to the darkness as she moved closer and closer to the herd. The bulls regarded her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, but she knew that she had to act quickly if her plan was going to work. With a deep breath, she began to shout and wave her arms, trying to get the bulls to move in the direction of the farmhouse. At first, the animals seemed reluctant to budge, but as Karen continued to press them, they slowly began to move, their hooves pounding against the ground as they surged forward. Karen watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the bulls headed toward the farmhouse, their bellows echoing through the night. She could practically see the chaos unfolding in her mind's eye, and she felt a sense of triumph wash over her. But as the bulls drew closer to the farmhouse, Karen's confidence began to waver. What if something went wrong? What if someone got hurt? The weight of her actions suddenly felt crushing, and she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to move. As the herd of bulls thundered toward the farmhouse, Karen felt a sudden wave of panic wash over her. What had she done? This was no longer some abstract plan for revenge. It was a real, tangible threat, and the consequences of her actions were suddenly all too clear. She watched in horror as the bulls crashed through the fencing surrounding the farmhouse, their massive bodies crashing into the weathered wooden structure. The sound of splintering wood and the terrified cries of Mr. Erikson echoed through the night, and Karen felt her stomach twist with a sickening mix of fear and regret. In the chaos, she spotted the old farmer emerging from the farmhouse, his face twisted with panic as he desperately tried to herd the bulls away from his home. But the animals were too strong, too wild, and they continued to rampage, destroying everything in their path. Karen stood frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the unfolding disaster. She had wanted to make Mr. Erikson pay, to humiliate him and take away his sense of control. But as she watched the sheer devastation unfold before her, she realized that she had gone too far, far beyond the realm of mere petty revenge. The sound of sirens in the distance snapped her out of her trance, and she felt a surge of panic. The authorities were coming, and she knew that she would be implicated in this whole mess. With a racing heart, she turned and fled, desperate to put as much distance between herself and the scene as possible. As she ran, Karen couldn't help but replay the events of the past few weeks in her mind. How had she let her thirst for revenge consume her so completely? What had started as a simple desire to get back at Mr. Erikson had spiraled into a twisted and dangerous obsession, one that had now put innocent lives at risk. By the time she reached the safety of her own home, Karen was a wreck. She paced back and forth, her mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. She had gone too far, she knew that now, and the consequences of her actions were going to be severe. As the sun began to rise, Karen finally collapsed onto her bed, her body racked with sobs. She had lost everything: her wedding, her sense of control, her very identity. And for what? A petty act of revenge that had gone horribly, tragically wrong. In the end, Karen knew that there was no one to blame but herself. She had let her own ego and sense of entitlement blind her to the very real and dangerous consequences of her actions. And now, she was left to face the aftermath. knowing that she had irrevocably changed the course of her life and the lives of those around her. As the sirens faded in the distance, Karen felt a profound sense of despair wash over her. She had thought that she could control the situation, that she could bend the world to her will. But in the end, she had been the one who had been broken, and the price she had paid was far higher than she ever could have imagined.